The philosopher who understood the meaning of life. Lev Tolstoy. Leo Tolstoy had everything most people spend their lives chasing: wealth, fame, a loving family, and a legacy as one of the greatest writers in history. His novels War and Peace and Anna Karenina were celebrated as masterpieces, admired by both scholars and ordinary readers. Yet, at the peak of his success, a question began to grow inside him, a question so heavy that it slowly unraveled his sense of purpose. What is the meaning of life if everything ends in death? This was not a passing doubt. It was a deep wound, a question that haunted him every morning. No matter how much he achieved, no matter how much he loved or was loved, death would eventually wipe everything away. He compared life to a man clinging to a thin branch over a dark pit, with a wild beast, death, waiting below. All the recognition, the luxury, the power he held only deepened the emptiness inside. Success, instead of bringing him peace, had made the silence louder. In search of answers, Tolstoy turned to philosophy and science. He studied great thinkers like Arthur Schopenhauer and Immanuel Kant. He explored logic, reason, and intellectual traditions, hoping to find a solid ground beneath the chaos of existence. But the more he read, the darker everything became. Philosophy analyzed life, but offered no final answer. Science reduced existence to biology and natural laws, cold and indifferent. Rationality gave him explanations, but no comfort. If everything ends, if every achievement fades, if love itself is eventually erased by time, then what is the point? Reason, instead of saving him, pushed him closer to despair. The world, when seen through the lens of pure logic, seemed empty, fleeting, and absurd. This growing void brought Tolstoy to a frightening conclusion. There were only two clear responses to this realization. One was to accept that life was meaningless and live in quiet despair. The other was to end his life and escape the absurdity altogether. He confessed later that he had to hide ropes and avoid carrying a gun out of fear that he might act on suicidal thoughts. This was not mere drama. It was the logical end of a worldview where nothing lasts, nothing matters, and death erases everything. Yet, even in this darkness, something in him refused to surrender completely. There was a part of him that could not accept that meaning was just an illusion. That stubborn spark made him look outside the walls of his own mind, at the world around him. He began to observe people who lived simple lives: peasants, farmers, workers, laborers. These people had no wealth, no intellectual fame, no legacy. By the standards of the world, they should have been more hopeless than him. And yet, they were not. They lived with a quiet strength, waking up each day with a sense of purpose that he, with all his achievements, had never felt. They accepted the hardships of life, worked, loved, raised families, and faced death without the kind of fear that tormented him. They did not sit up at night asking whether life had meaning. They simply lived as if it did. Their faith in something larger than themselves, whether it was God, tradition, or the natural order of life, gave them peace. Tolstoy realized that these people had found something he had spent years overlooking. Meaning was not a puzzle to be solved through logic. It was something to be lived. They did not need the kind of certainty he had been desperately chasing. They embraced mystery. They accepted suffering as part of existence. They did not fear death in the same way he did. Their faith was not a theory but a way of living, and it gave them a strength that all his intellectual knowledge could not provide. Slowly, he began to understand that his mistake had been believing that meaning must be rational, absolute, and eternal to be real. But meaning does not need to be proven. It can live in the smallest actions, in love, in connection, in living fully. As this understanding grew inside him, he looked back at his old life. Fame, wealth, and legacy had brought him nothing but despair. He noticed that many around him, writers, nobles, scholars, were also trapped in the same silent emptiness. They lived in beautiful homes, wore fine clothes, were admired by others, and yet carried a quiet restlessness in their eyes. Some drowned their emptiness in indulgence, others in distraction. But beneath the surface, They were lost just like him. The illusion of success had not given them peace. It had only delayed the moment they would have to face the same question he did. Tolstoy turned away from the world of privilege and began to spend more time among ordinary people. He observed their lives closely, not with arrogance, but with genuine curiosity. At first, he thought their peace came from ignorance. But soon he saw it was not ignorance. It was wisdom, one that could not be written in books or proven through arguments. A farmer did not ask whether life had meaning. He simply woke up to tend his fields. A mother did not question whether love mattered. She simply held her child. A craftsman did not need to explain why his work was important. He simply built. These people did not chase meaning. They lived it. There was another element that deeply moved Tolstoy, their faith. Almost all of these simple people believed in something larger than themselves. Their faith was not an intellectual argument or a debate. It was part of their daily lives. It gave them strength in suffering, hope in darkness, and courage in the face of death. For years, Tolstoy had dismissed religion as a crutch for the weak. Now he saw it differently. Faith, for them, was not an escape from reality. It was a way of standing firmly in it. Their belief was not built on logic. It was lived and breathed. And in that lived faith, they found peace. This was the turning point in Tolstoy's life. He realized that the meaning of life is not hidden in philosophical systems or scientific laws. It is not something waiting to be discovered at the end of a long intellectual journey. It is here, in the present moment, in the way we live, love, and connect. Meaning is not built through thought alone, but through experience. The philosophers debated, the scientists analyzed, the artists expressed, but none of them answered the question that simple living did. With this realization, Tolstoy began to change. He gave up much of his wealth, abandoned the privileges of his class, and embraced a simpler way of life. He no longer placed his faith in status or a legacy. Instead, he found strength in humility, service, and connection to something beyond himself. He no longer feared death because he no longer saw himself as separate from life. The meaning he had spent years chasing had always been there. He had simply been looking in the wrong places. Tolstoy's transformation was not just personal. It reshaped his worldview. His later writings focused on moral and spiritual questions, stripping away the illusions of wealth and power. He clashed with institutions that once celebrated him, choosing instead to live closer to the truth he had found among ordinary people. He dressed simply, lived modestly, and devoted himself to helping others. The despair that had once consumed him faded, replaced by a quiet, enduring peace. He understood that meaning is not something to achieve, but something to live. His journey speaks to a truth many people eventually face. We are often told that meaning lies in success, recognition, or greatness. But when we reach those heights, we may find only silence. The meaning we chase is not out there in the distance. It often exists in the smallest, most ordinary moments, love shared with another person, the touch of nature, a sense of faith, or the act of simply being present. Life's meaning is not in what we think. It is in how we live.